The Ragnarok Prophecy Explained, Part 1. The Children of Chaos. We have spoken of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, the great, final, and unavoidable doom of the Norse cosmos. But an end must have a beginning, and the beginning of this end lies not in a great battle, but in a strange and terrible family. This is the story of 3 children, born of a union between the god of chaos and a giantess of sorrow, a wolf destined to swallow a king, a serpent destined to poison a champion, and a daughter destined to rule the dead. They were the children of Loki, and their birth was the first, terrible note in the symphony of destruction. But were these beings born as monsters, or were they made into monsters by the fear and cruelty of the gods themselves? Today, we journey to the iron woods of Jotunheim and to the golden halls of Asgard to witness the birth of the apocalypse. This is a story of a prophecy that became self-fulfilling, a tale of how the gods, in their desperate attempt to chain down their future, only succeeded in forging the very keys to their own destruction. Welcome to the Eldritch Codex. Today, we begin our 3-part explanation of the Ragnarok prophecy, starting with Part 1, the Children of Chaos. To understand the end of all things, we must first understand its beginning. And the beginning of this end, the beginning of Ragnarok, the great and terrible twilight of the gods, lies not in a grand battle, nor in a single great betrayal. It lies in a family, a strange, terrible, and powerful family, born of a union between the 2 most disruptive and chaotic forces in the Norse cosmos. To understand the children who will one day unravel the world, we must first understand their parents. Their father was a god who was not a god, an Aesir who was not an Aesir. He was Loki, the trickster, the shapeshifter, the god of chaos and cunning, a being of fire and intellect who walked the fine, dangerous line between the ordered world of Asgard and the chaotic world of the giants. He was the son of a giant, yet the blood brother of Odin himself. He belonged to neither world and yet to both. He was the agent of change, the flaw in every perfect pattern, the necessary and dangerous catalyst in the otherwise staid and predictable world of the gods. He was the question that had no easy answer, the problem that could also, sometimes, be the solution. And in his many travels in the dark, cold, and mountainous land of the giants, Jotunheim, he took a consort. She was not a goddess, nor a mortal woman. She was a giantess, a Jotun, and her name was Angerboa. The ancient texts tell us that her name means the one who brings grief, or sorrowbringer. She was not a simple, brutish giantess of rock and ice. She was a powerful and fearsome being in her own right, a creature of shadow and dark, prophetic magic. She was a seeress, a sorceress, a being whose very essence was tied to the dark, sorrowful, and destructive side of fate. Their union was not one of love, not in the way we understand it. It was a magnetic, cosmic attraction between 2 forces of profound, world-altering chaos. It was the meeting of the unpredictable fire of the trickster and the cold, dark, and sorrowful shadow of the giantess. And from this unholy, and perhaps, inevitable union 3 children were born. They were not born in the golden, shining halls of Asgard. They were not born in the world of men. They were born in the dark, twisted, and ancient ironwood, Jernver, a terrible and shadowy forest in the heart of Jotunheim, a place known for being the breeding ground of trolls, witches, and monstrous, giant wolves. And from the very moment of their birth, they were unlike any other beings in the 9 worlds. They were anomalies, they were paradoxes, they were creatures of immense and terrifying potential, each one embodying a different aspect of the chaos from which they were spawned. The firstborn was a wolf, but this was no ordinary wolf pup. From the moment he was born, he grew at an unnatural, terrifying, and exponential rate. His fur was not the brown or gray of a common wolf, but the color of the dark, roiling storm clouds that gather before a great, world-ending blizzard. And his eyes, even as a pup, did not hold the simple animal intelligence of a beast. They held a cold, ancient, and deeply unsettling intelligence, the eyes of a being that could see and comprehend the world in a way that no animal should. He was Fenrir, the great wolf. The second-born was a serpent. But this was no ordinary serpent. It was so small at birth that it could curl in the palm of a hand, a beautiful jewel-like creature. Yet it grew so fast that within days, it was too large to be contained, its scales shimmering with all the sickly, beautiful, and iridescent colors of a poisoned sea. And its venom, even a single drop, was a substance of pure cosmic death. He was Jormungandr, the world serpent. And the third-born was a daughter. But she was no ordinary goddess. From the moment of her birth, her very form was a contradiction, a horrifying paradox. One half of her body, from the top of her head to the tip of her toes, was that of a beautiful, living woman, with fair, pale skin and a noble, if deeply melancholic expression. But the other half of her body, a perfect vertical split, was that of a rotting corpse, her skin a mottled blue-black and decaying ruin, her features skeletal and horrific. She was a being of two worlds, of life and death, existing in a state of permanent, impossible, and terrifying contradiction. She was Hel, the half-dead queen. These were the three children of Loki, the god of chaos, and Angerboa, the bringer of grief, the wolf, the serpent, and the half-dead queen. And their birth was not a cause for celebration. It was the first, terrible, and dissonant note in the symphony of destruction that would one day be known as Ragnarok. They were not just children. They were living, breathing prophecies, the physical embodiment of the doom that was to come. And the news of their monstrous, portentous birth would soon travel on the cold winds, all the way to the golden halls of Asgard, and to the ears of the All-Father himself. The news of the birth of Loki's monstrous children did not travel to Asgard through common messengers. It traveled on the dark wings of prophecy, on the cold, psychic winds that blow between the worlds. Odin, the All-Father, sitting on his high throne, Hliskjolf, from which he could see all that happened in the 9 worlds, felt their birth not as a piece of news, but as a sudden, sickening lurch in the tapestry of fate. His 2 ravens, Hugin and Munin, Thought and Memory, returned from their daily flight across the cosmos with whispers of a new, terrible power rising in the iron wood of Jotunheim. And with this news, a profound and chilling dread, colder than any Fimbulwinter, descended upon the golden halls of Asgard. For Odin, the great and relentless seeker of knowledge, had seen these children before. He had seen them in the swirling, prophetic waters of Mimir's well, the visions for which he had paid with his own eye. He had seen their shapes in the twisting, arcane patterns of the runes, the secrets for which he had hung himself from the world tree. He knew who they were, and he knew, with an absolute and soul-crushing certainty, the terrible, central, and unavoidable role they were destined to play in the final fiery act of Ragnarok. He knew that the great wolf, Fenrir, was fated to one day grow so powerful that no chain could hold him, and that on the great, final battlefield of Vigrid, he would break free and swallow Odin himself whole, ending the reign of the All-Father. He knew that the great serpent, Jormungandr, was fated to grow so impossibly large that it would encircle the entire world of men, Midgard, holding its own tail in its mouth, and that in the final battle, it would be slain by his mightiest son, Thor, but not before poisoning the thunder god with its deadly, black venom, ensuring that they would die together. And he knew that the half-dead daughter, Hel, was destined to become the grim and powerful queen of the underworld, the vast, misty realm of the dishonored dead, and that at Ragnarok, she would unleash her terrible army of corpses upon the forces of Asgard, their ghostly legion sailing on a ship made from the fingernails of the dead. This was not a possibility. This was not a warning. This was a certainty, a fixed point in the cosmos. And the gods of Asgard, for all their power, for all their glory, for all their supposed mastery over the 9 worlds, were afraid. Their fear was not a simple, cowardly thing. It was a cold, pragmatic, and strategic fear. They saw these 3 children not as children, not as the innocent, if strange, offspring of their sometimes ally, sometimes enemy, Loki. They saw them as weapons forged by fate itself. They saw them as living, breathing, and growing time bombs, created by the cosmos for the sole express purpose of their own destruction. And so, a great and terrible council was held in the halls of Asgard. The gods debated, their voices a mixture of anger, fear, and grim resolve. Some, the more hot-headed among them, argued for their immediate and total destruction. To kill the wolf and the serpent while they were still young, before they could grow to their full world-ending size. To cast the half-dead girl into a celestial fire. But Odin, in his vast, and often sorrowful wisdom, forbade it. To kill them now, he argued, would be to spill sacred, if monstrous, blood on the sanctified soil of Asgard, a crime that would stain their honor and, perhaps, even hasten the coming of their doom. And besides, he knew, with his seer's sight, that their fate was so powerfully and so intricately woven into the tapestry of the cosmos that to try and kill them now would be futile. Fate would simply find another, perhaps even more terrible and more direct, way to bring about their prophesied roles. To strike them down now might only make them martyrs, and their return even more certain. No, they could not be killed, but they could be contained. They could be imprisoned. They could be isolated, their prophesied paths hopefully diverted. And so the gods of Asgard, in their great fear and their cold pragmatism, decided on a course of action that was both logical and, in its own way, monstrous. They would not wait for the children to commit a crime. They would punish them preemptively for the crimes they were fated to commit. They would, in their very attempt to defy the prophecy, become the instruments that would turn it into a self-fulfilling one. Odin, his one eye filled with a grim resolve, commanded that the 3 children be brought from the darkness of Jotunheim to the golden light of Asgard for judgment. And Loki, their father, could do nothing to stop it. He was bound by his ancient blood oath to Odin, and he was hopelessly outmatched by the combined might of the Aesir. And so, he watched in silent, impotent fury as his three strange, powerful, and now doomed children were taken from their mother, Angerboa, the bringer of grief, and brought before the judgment of the gods. The first act of the tragedy of Ragnarok was about to be set in motion, not by a monster, but by a council of frightened gods. The three children of Loki and Angerboa stood before the assembled gods of Asgard, a strange, terrifying, and profoundly unnatural sight in the golden, ordered halls of Gladsheim. Fenrir, already the size of a full-grown wolf from the mountains of Midgard, snarled. His intelligent eyes filled with a defiant, wary mistrust. He did not cower, he watched and he learned. Jormungandr, no longer a small, jewel-like creature but a great, coiling serpent as long as the hall was wide, hissed, its forked tongue tasting the unfamiliar, sterile air of Asgard, its scales shimmering with all the sickly, beautiful colors of a poisoned sea. And Hel stood silent, her gaze downcast, her very presence a chilling, physical rebuke to the vibrant, eternal life of the Aesir. Her living side was as beautiful as any goddess, her dead side as horrifying as any draugr from a haunted barrow. The gods could not look upon her without feeling both desire and revulsion, life and death, in the same unsettling instant. Odin, the All-Father, sat upon his high throne, his one eye seeing not just the children before him, but the terrible, fiery future they represented. He passed his judgment, his voice not filled with anger, but with a cold, grim, and absolute finality. He looked first at the great, growing serpent Jormungandr. He saw the future in his mind's eye, a future where this serpent was so impossibly, colossally large that it could crush the entire world of men in its coils. Such a creature could not be allowed to remain in Asgard, where its growth would surely shatter the golden halls. Nor could it be left in any of the 9 worlds where it could grow to its full, terrible potential. It had to be removed from the system. And so, with a great exertion of his divine, all-fatherly power, Odin himself seized the great, writhing serpent. He gripped its massive, thrashing body, and with a mighty, cosmic heave, he cast it from the heights of Asgard, down through the void, down through the clouds, and into the great, encircling ocean that surrounded Midgard, the world of men. There, in the deepest, darkest, and most remote trenches of the sea, he hoped it would be lost forever in the endless, dark depths. But the serpent did not die, and it was not lost, thrived. In the deep, dark, and endless ocean, surrounded by the pressure and the cold, it grew, and it grew, and it grew. It fed on the great whales and the monstrous krakens of the deep. It grew so large, so impossibly, unbelievably vast, that its body encircled the entire world of men. It grew until it was forced to grasp its own tail in its mouth to fit within the confines of the global ocean. It became the Midgard serpent, the world serpent, a permanent, living, and self-sustaining boundary to the world of men. It became a constant, simmering threat, a living symbol of the chaos that lies just beyond the shores of our own small world, forever waiting for the day of Ragnarok, when it would release its tail, churn the oceans into a poisonous flood, and rise to face its final, fateful, and mortal enemy, Thor. The gods had tried to dispose of it, but had only succeeded in placing it exactly where it needed to be to fulfill its terrible destiny. Next, Odin turned his gaze upon the silent, two-toned daughter, Hel. He looked at her strange, half-beautiful, half-corpse-like face, and he saw her destiny written upon it. He saw her as the queen of a grim, misty, and joyless kingdom. And so, in his cold, pragmatic wisdom, he decided to give her that kingdom, to make her the very thing she represented. He cast her down, not into a prison, but into the deepest, darkest, and coldest of the 9 worlds. The misty, primordial realm of Niflheim, the land of endless mist and ice. He gave her dominion over all those who died of sickness, of old age, or of any cause other than glorious, honorable battle. He made her the queen of the dishonored, the unheroic, the cowardly, the vast, silent majority of the dead. Her kingdom, which came to be known as Helheim, became a place of shadow, of gloom, and of despair. And she ruled it from her great, terrible hall, Eljudnir, her plate named Hunger, her knife named Famine, her bed named Sickbed, and her servants named Delay and Slowness. The gods believed they had neutralized her. They had given her a vast, important, and all-consuming kingdom to rule, a kingdom that would keep her occupied and far away from them and their sunlit world of Asgard. But all they had done was to give her an army. For uncounted centuries, she would gather the countless, silent, and resentful souls of the dead, building a legion of ghosts and reanimated corpses, a vast, unstoppable army of the damned. An army that, on the day of Ragnarok, She would lead out of her realm on a great, terrible ship named Naglfar, a ship made entirely from the uncut fingernails of the dead, to wage war upon the very gods who had sent her there. The gods had tried to marginalize her, to place her in a position of grim, but harmless, authority. But they had only succeeded in giving her the very power, the very subjects, and the very reason she would need to become one of their greatest and most terrifying enemies. The serpent was now in its ocean. The queen was now on her throne. And the prophecy was now 2 steps closer to its terrible fulfillment. 2 of the children of chaos had been dealt with, their fates sealed, their paths set. But the 3rd child, the great wolf Fenrir, presented the greatest and most immediate problem for the gods of Asgard. The prophecies about him were the most specific, the most personal, and the most terrifying. He was destined to be the one to kill Odin himself, to swallow the Allfather whole on the battlefield of Ragnarok. The gods could not cast him out, for where could they send a beast of such immense and growing potential strength? And they would not, allow him to roam free in the golden halls of Asgard. And so, in a decision that was a mixture of strategic calculation and profound, fearful arrogance, they decided they would raise him themselves. They would keep him in their own halls where they could watch him, study him, and hopefully control him. They believed they could, through their own divine influence, tame the untamable and perhaps rewrite the prophecy through sheer force of will. But the wolf grew at a terrifying, unnatural rate. Every day he was larger, stronger, his muscles like great, knotted ropes of iron, his teeth like sharpened daggers. The small, strange pup that had been brought to Asgard was now a monstrous beast, his shoulders as high as a tall man's, his howl shaking the very foundations of the celestial halls. The gods, who had once thought to control him, now grew to fear him. They would see him loping through the courtyards of Asgard, and they would give him a wide berth, their hands instinctively moving to the hilts of their swords. All of the gods feared him except for one, the noble and perhaps tragically naive god of war and justice, Tyr. Tyr, alone among the Aesir, saw not just the monster of the prophecy, but a powerful, intelligent, and in its own way magnificent creature. He saw the defiance in Fenrir's eyes, and as the god of single combat and warrior's honor, he respected it. He was the only one who dared to approach the great wolf. He fed Fenrir great sides of meat from his own hands. He spoke to him not as a beast, but as a fellow warrior, and he treated him with a strange, straightforward, and unwavering respect. And Fenrir, in turn, a creature who had known nothing but fear and suspicion from the other gods, seemed to trust Tyr above all others. A strange, and ultimately tragic, bond of mutual respect formed between the god of justice and the beast that was destined to be the greatest agent of chaos. But the other gods could not see past their own fear. They saw Fenrir's growing strength, and they knew, with a certainty that gnawed at their immortal souls, that they had to act. They had to bind him. They went to their great forges and, with all their skill, they created a great heavy chain, the strongest they could possibly imagine. They named it Latting. They approached Fenrir, not with open aggression, but with a clever, deceptive challenge. "You have grown strong, great wolf," they said, their voices full of a false, hearty praise. "But let us test your strength. Let us make a game of it. Let us see if you can break this chain." Fenrir, young and proud, and perhaps eager to prove his might to the gods who so clearly feared him, agreed. He allowed them to bind him, to wrap the heavy iron links around his powerful legs and torso. Then, with a single, mighty, and almost contemptuous flex of his powerful muscles, the great chain shattered into 100 pieces, the links flying across the hall like shrapnel. The gods were terrified, their faces pale, but they hid their fear behind forced, nervous laughter and loud praise for the wolf's incredible strength. They returned to their forges, their pride now on the line. They created a second chain, this one twice as strong, twice as heavy, a massive, brutal chain of iron that they named Dromi. Once again, they came to the wolf with their false game. Fenrir looked at the new chain and he was hesitant. He could see that it was far stronger than the first. He knew that this was more than just a game, but his own pride, and his desire to impress Tyr, the one god who had shown him honor, won out. He allowed them to bind him once more. He struggled this time. He strained against the great, thick links, his muscles bunching, his claws scrabbling against the stone floor. For a moment it seemed the chain would hold. And then, with a great, earth-shaking heave, a roar of pure, primal power, Dromi, too, shattered, its links not just breaking, but warping and twisting as if they were made of soft clay. Now the gods were in a state of absolute, undisguised panic. Their own strength, their own craftsmanship, was not enough to contain the beast. They had failed twice, and Fenrir was growing stronger by the day. Odin knew they needed a different kind of magic, a magic older and more subtle than their own brute force and simple smithing. And so, he sent a messenger, the swift and clever Skirner, down to the dark, subterranean realm of the dwarves, Svartalfheim, to commission a chain that could not be broken. The dwarves, the master craftsmen of the 9 worlds, agreed to make such a fetter, but they did not make it of iron or of any earthly metal. They made it of magic, of concepts, of things that do not exist. They forged it from 6 impossible and paradoxical ingredients: the sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. And from these 6 nothings, they created a chain that was not a chain. It was a ribbon, a thin, silken, smooth, and deceptively fragile-looking ribbon. It was named Gleipnir. The gods took this silken ribbon and went to Fenrir for a third and final time. They took him to a remote island in the middle of a great lake, a place where he could not escape. They showed him the ribbon. "We have one final test for you, great Fenrir," they said, their voices now holding a sharp, nervous edge. "If you can break this thin, silken band, your fame for strength will be known and celebrated throughout the 9 worlds, and we will trouble you no more." Fenrir looked at the silken ribbon, and his great, intelligent, and now deeply suspicious, eyes narrowed. "There is no glory for me in breaking such a flimsy-looking thing," he snarled, his voice a low, threatening growl. "But if, as I suspect, it is made with trickery and magic, then I will not have it on me. I suspect a trap. You do not mean to test me. You mean to bind me." The gods taunted him, calling him a coward, afraid of a simple, silken ribbon. Fenrir, his pride wounded, but his suspicion unabated, offered a compromise, a test of their own honor, a way to call their bluff. "I will allow you to bind me with this ribbon," he declared, his gaze steady and challenging. "But only if one of you will place his hand in my mouth as a pledge of your good faith. If there is no trickery and I am released, then I will release your hand. But if you betray me, and the ribbon holds, then I will have my price." The gods looked at each other in fear and silence. They looked at the fragile-looking ribbon, and then at the great, fanged maw of the wolf. And none of them were willing to make such a terrible sacrifice. None except one, the noble god of war and justice, Tyr, the only friend the wolf had ever known, stepped forward. His face was a mask of grim, sorrowful resolve. He looked at Fenrir, and there was a silent, tragic understanding between them. And then, without a word, Tyr placed his right hand into the great, fanged mouth of the wolf. The other gods then quickly, and with a sense of desperate urgency, bound Fenrir with the silken ribbon, Gleipnir. The wolf strained, he flexed, he heaved with all his might, a might that could shatter the strongest iron. But the magical, conceptual chain held firm. The more he struggled against it, the tighter it became. And Fenrir knew he had been betrayed by all of them, by the gods he had sought to impress, and even by Tyr, the one he had trusted. He looked at Tyr, a look of profound, heartbreaking, and sorrowful betrayal in his intelligent eyes. And then, with a final, terrible snap, he closed his great jaws, severing the god's hand at the wrist. The gods, all except the now one-handed, and forever solemn Tyr, let out a great, triumphant cheer of victory. They had done it. They had bound the great wolf. They took the end of the ribbon, passed it through a great stone slab, and anchored it deep within the earth. And when the wolf, in his rage, tried to bite them, they took a great sword and wedged it in his mouth, its hilt on his lower jaw and its point on his upper jaw, keeping his mouth forever open. And there, on that lonely island, the great wolf Fenrir lay bound, howling in rage, in sorrow, and in a betrayal so deep it would fuel his hatred for an age. A river of foam from his tortured, open mouth flowed out into the world. He was a prisoner of a prophecy, a victim of the gods' great fear. They had sought to prevent him from becoming their enemy, and in doing so, they had given him every possible reason to be. They had given him an unbreakable chain, and an unbreakable, all-consuming hatred, and they had left him there to wait, and to grow stronger in his rage, until the day of Ragnarok, when his chains would finally, inevitably, break. And so, the 3 great and powerful children of chaos were dealt with. The serpent Jormungandr was cast into the sea, a sentence of isolation that would only allow it to grow to its full, world-encircling, and monstrous potential. The daughter, Hel, was cast down into the darkness and made a queen, a sentence of authority that would only allow her to gather the vast, silent, and resentful army of the dead. And the great wolf, Fenrir, was bound in an unbreakable magical chain, a sentence of betrayal and torment that would only allow his rage, his hatred, and his strength to grow and fester for uncounted ages. The gods of Asgard, standing on the shores of that lonely island, looked upon their work, and they believed they had averted disaster. They believed they had, through their strength, their cunning, and their willingness to make hard, preemptive choices outwitted fate. They had taken the three greatest threats to their existence and had locked them away, neutralizing them before they could fulfill their terrible destinies. They believed, secured their golden age for centuries to come. But they had not. They had merely, and tragically, fulfilled the prophecy in the most personal and intimate way possible. They had taken three powerful, chaotic, and perhaps, in the beginning, neutral beings whose futures were foretold but not yet written in stone. And they had, through their own, all-consuming fear, turned them into the very monsters the prophecy had foretold. They had given Jormungandr an entire world to grow in, and a reason to hate the world of gods and men that existed above him. They had given Hell a kingdom of the damned and a powerful grievance against the gods of the living who had cast her out. And most terribly of all, they had given Fenrir, the great wolf, a reason for an all-consuming, righteous, and world-ending vengeance. They had shown him that the gods' honor was a lie, that their praise was a trap, and that their justice was simply a tool of their fear. The story of Loki's children is not a story of monsters being born. It is a story of monsters being made. It is a tragedy of a self-fulfilling prophecy, a chilling and profound tale of how the fear of a future can be the very thing that creates it. The gods of Asgard, in their desperate attempt to chain down their doom, had only succeeded in forging the very keys to their own fiery and glorious destruction. They had not prevented Ragnarok. They had simply and perfectly set the stage for it. The first act of the great, final tragedy of the Norse cosmos was complete, and it had been written not by the hand of the trickster god Loki, but by the fear in the hearts of the gods themselves. And now all the pieces were in place, waiting and hating and growing, for the day the sun would turn black, and the great, final battle would begin. Sometimes the greatest monsters are not born of chaos, but are forged in the fires of our own fear. And sometimes, the chains we use to bind our enemies only serve to make their hatred and their resolve unbreakable. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of the Ragnarok prophecy. If this unveiling of a primordial family has changed your perspective, show your support by liking this video, subscribing to the Eldritch Codex, and hitting the notification bell. For part 2 of our epic series, The Light That Failed, is coming soon. What other prophecy in mythology do you believe was fulfilled by the very attempt to prevent it? Let us know in the comments. Until next time, remember that the chains we forge for others can sometimes become the very chains that bind us to our own inescapable doom.